Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare.
Welcome, Bookends, to our Rathbones Folio Prize 2023 special, where we are talking to the three winners of this year's prize. We'll be joined by Margo Jefferson, the winner of the Non-Fiction Prize this year, Michelle de Kretser, the winner of the Fiction Prize this year, and winner of the Poetry category, Victoria Adukwei Bulley. We are so excited to speak to all three of this year's winners, and we hope you enjoy our conversations.
First awarded in 2014, the Rathbones Folio Prize is open to all works of literature written in English and published in the UK. The prize is unique in that it is judged by members of the 300-plus strong Rathbones Folio Academy of esteemed writers and critics. This year's prize shortlist was arguably the strongest yet, and we are so pleased to share this year's winners with you all.
Margo Jefferson is an American writer, professor and critic. Margo was a theatre and book critic for Newsweek and the New York Times and won the 1995 Pulitzer Prize for criticism. Her writing has appeared in Vogue, New York Magazine and The New Republic, amongst other publications. Margo is the author of 3 books. Her memoir, Negroland, received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Autobiography in 2016. It also won the Bridge Prize, the Heartland Prize, and was shortlisted for the Baillie Gifford Prize. Her most recent book, Constructing a Nervous System, a memoir, is a wildly imaginative interrogation of art, race, family, identity and gender, and made her not only the 2023 Rathbones Folio Prize non-fiction winner, but the overall winner for the prize too. Margo, it's an honour to be in your presence today. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Well, thank you. I am glad to be here.
So, firstly, we are huge fans of the Rathbones Folio Prize and we followed it for many a year, but what was it like for you to be nominated and ultimately win this esteemed accolade?
Well, the nomination was a total surprise and a delight, not least because I was in company, among writers that I really admired. So that always gives you a lift. It probably makes you, more certain that you probably won't get it, but I feel very good about the company you keep. You're invited to keep. So that was lovely. But the winning of nonfiction and then of the entire prize was stunning and really quite overwhelming, I must say. And that it is a prize. Well, a couple of things that some prizes do pair nonfiction with fiction. Obviously, poetry's always there, but plenty don't. So, this was very, very moving to me that nonfiction was standing shoulder to shoulder with fiction and poetry, and that writers whom I admire enormously made the decision. That too felt exhilarating.
Absolutely.
And humbling, but also empowering. You're very virtuous if you're feeling empowered and humble. Right.
Absolutely. Won so many awards. Does it ever get old? Does it ever?
I haven't won so many that it gets old. I've been on my share of shortlist.
Yes.
And like those people who sit in the audience when they don't get Beyonce.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so nice. And it is an honor. And it is an honor.
Now, moving on to your book, Margo, I would love to start with your brilliant title, which I've already heard you receive many a compliment for on various interviews you've given. What does it mean to construct a nervous system?
For me, it meant investigating and realigning, rearranging, recreating what I would call my sensibility. For me, I don't mean nervous system, in the usual technical medical way, but I mean it as this collection of really a writer or an artist's tools, your sounds, sights, images, thoughts, passions, which can include hatred for all kinds of cultural objects and subjects, and that sense that instead of always being locked into, this is my take, this is my perspective on this, on my life, on the emotions that I feel, on this piece of material culture, to feel that you can, I mean, it's a little very optimistic, but that you can continually reshape and reform your sensations, your thoughts, as we are always, as writers, trying to do with our words, with our language.
I loved the way in which it was written, and it really threw me when you reference Michaela Cole, who we are huge fans of, and there's an interview that Michaela Cole did with Louis Theroux, and it really struck me the way in which she speaks. It really reminded me, I felt the way that you wrote the book was very similar to the way that she speaks, in that she's always kind of allowing her thoughts to come, and she's allowing them to sort of, like you said, reform and reshape. And she's kind of not afraid for them to do that in real time, if that makes sense.
No, it does. That's the way her TV series work. So that delights me, actually.
Yeah, she's incredible.
She's incredible. We're just could talk about Michaela Cole all night. Yeah. And what I found really great about this book as well, for our bookends, you might be like, what is this book? The format of the book has been described as deconstructed and unconventional in its style. You've kind of taken the concept of a memoir and kind of flipped it on its head. How did you go about choosing how you're going to style it or format it, and what effect do you hope it has on the reader?
Yeah, I had very much felt, I started to say decided, but I really felt before I decided it, that I did not want the kind of traditional arc of, the growing psyche and soul.
Yeah.
And I had actually decided that when I wrote my previous book, Negro Land. But it did have some, and that made sense. It was in certain ways a more traditional memoir. So it did have some chronologies going. But here I really wanted, and that has to do again with my sense that the construction of this self, this writing self, and its parts, that was always in progress. So I wanted a much more sense of collage and of ways that certainly the reader could follow, ways in which one subject linked to another. I might say, oh God, I've just been so serious, I'm exhausted. Let's be lighthearted. So they had their breadcrumbs, like Hansel and Gretel, but I wanted to enjoy for myself, but also to encourage the reader to trust how their mind and emotions would associate, would jump back, do a close-up, then pan out. So that has its own order, its own sense of order. It's not order versus disorder. It's kind of simultaneous. It's getting, you get the rhythm, and then your own mind starts, as the reader, your own mind starts to attune itself. But I wanted to stay alive and interested, and I really wanted to allow, because often being a critic or memoirs too, you take a stand, you find, some gestural power, and you stick with it. I really wanted to get at and examine and explore, variety and change, and looking back and feeling differently.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of what I thought the book represented was about like that concept of like looking back and the memories that we look at. So I know that when I reflect on my life or reminisce, I do not do it in a linear fashion at all. And I don't reflect and go, oh, when I was 3 and then when I was 4 and then this happened. It is very...
It might be when I was 3, but... No, actually,
yeah, exactly.
that isn't exactly the way it happened. Yeah. And
yeah,
that's right. And also you can get at the same so-called facts of your life, from different angles. One day it might be, Ella Fitzgerald, that sets you in motion. Another day it's Little Women,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I really wanted to be fair to that. To do justice to that.
Yeah, I did say to Lydia before we started this interview that I really felt like you'd had a lot of fun writing this. It really felt like that, it felt like an ongoing sort of conversation with the reader, but it also felt like an ongoing conversation with yourself. And it felt like at times you were conversing with yourself, at times it felt like you were arguing with yourself. And it felt very playful at times, even though the more darker things explored, but it was very playful in the way that you wrote it. And I really, really enjoyed that.
Very glad to hear that. You know what else was a huge factor? My love for quoting other writers. You know, drawing their words, altering their words, putting them in conversation with me. So, you know, that also just, it quickens your own sense of how you can change, how you can alter a tone. And I loved that. Because it didn't have that usual arc of tension and, you know, leading to catharsis. I wanted a lot of alternative, but, you know, polyphonic, let's say, ways of tones and notes and ways of creating excitement, then giving rest, mood shifts, you know, that can inhabit nearby spaces. Fonts, playing with fonts, which I did a lot. It was helpful for me. I found myself instinctively doing it while I was writing. You know, the way you raise your voice or lower it, or and it just helped remind me. You're going in a lot of directions, but that was fun to do. Yeah,
I think so many times we feel constrained, don't we, by the kind of the rules of of writing.
And literally be graphic rules, you know.
Yeah,
paragraphs have to go in this order. Or just, you know, nope, not a one sentence line here. No, just keep going.
Yeah.
So again, that sense of something that could be, even if it wasn't improvised literally, it could have that feeling. Yeah. And also it made me listen to my voice and voices more clearly, like say directions. Yeah.
Do you think any of your students will be coming back to you after this and be asking you, what are these rules that you told us about? And now you
now what I'm careful and I'm artful in that I choose the subjects, the forms that I teach. So I teach things like hybrid nonfiction forms and cultural memoir and you know, criticism, which includes multiple things, or you know, personal and arts criticism. So I get to play now.
Away with it.
Stops. You know, you adapt to what the student is writing and wants to do. But I think I'm well covered on that. Or, right? We'll see what they'll think.
Now, you were just talking about, we just touched on memory. And one thing that I really loved about your book is the way that you wrote about family. I thought you wrote about your family in this really beautiful and evocative way. And I especially loved the way that you wrote about your sister Denise. And I'm a sucker for a story of sisters because I'm one of 4. So I found it very moving. Do you feel that your love for the arts and culture was inspired by your family?
It inculcated? Yeah. Yes, I do. You have to take it, you know, where you want it to be. But both my parents were the consumers of the arts. My father, before medical school, had a life that one part of him really wanted to follow as a musician. You know, my mother she loves literature, she loved music, but it was very much a part. And in that way, our being girls worked to our advantage. It was very much a part of how we were raised. We each started quite early, piano lessons, ballet lessons. The schools we were sent to were very involved. You know, you'd go to museums, whatever. And parents would do that too. They would pay, mother especially, very close attention to what we were genuinely interested in. I was a better musician. Denise was the dancer. And, you know, at a certain point when I think Denise was about 9 or 10, she said, you know, I want more serious ballet lessons. And my mother called a friend who had been a professional dancer, Frances Taylor, and she found the right teacher for Denise. The same thing happened to me with piano. So, you know, one got a sense very early that this was not just, you know, culturally pleasing and appropriate, but pleasurable, exciting. and something that as a woman, as a girl, as a woman, you really could take hold of. It didn't impose the same barriers that, say, wanting to be a scientist did, in those eras. Yeah. So yes, I do think so. And, this was just part of what we took pleasure in growing up.
Yeah, you really get a sense of that, and I loved the way that you linked your sister and yourself training in ballet, and the exploration of the body doing ballet, and the link to yours and your sister's love for the Olympic runners.
Yes, the white ballet body, the Olympic runners, black body, Denise with her black body, and me, and our negotiating always those worlds, and trying to find spaces in them both, work them to accommodate us.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I read that you toyed with becoming an actor and following routes like this, but ultimately you chose to kind of invoke characters through writing instead, and exploring voices through that instead.
Yes, and also to dialogue as a critic, some kind of dialogue with writers. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, Hannah and I, we're both actors, if we haven't mentioned it enough on the podcast. Just once or twice.
Tell me more.
And so I find it fascinating that you use writing to explore character and people, and the way that you look through the lens of others to sort of analyze yourself in a way as well. What is that like as a process?
Since you brought up acting, I will say that one reason I think it mattered so much to me wasn't what I was good at as an actress. I always had a certain flair, but it was this, perpetual, it's Margo. I didn't have that ability to seemingly suppress these very individual traits and voices and find, expression in another character. To examine that and explore that through writing, through your language, through the particular point of view you take, through structure, that was maybe initially compensatory for me, and then it became fascinating. It also had to do with when I wrote my first memoir. I realized, more concretely than I had before, if I'm being accurate about my cultural and personal history, it involved many persona. It involved a lot of, as a upper middle class young black girl who became a black woman, at these times in the United States where bigotry and racism and all of that were going on. That world I belonged to was constantly performing. What is, what do we have to do to be recognized as equal, to be admired, to be treated fairly, decently? Even what do I need to do to audition for a celebrated white piano teacher who I think has not had, a black student before? But what changes are required when I'm in an all black party as an adolescent and in an all-black white party? There's some overlap, but there are stylistic differences. So, I realized that this had a lot to do, this life of mine, with social and psychological performances. And, then I could take that further with constructing nervous system, and really use it to engage more freely and more intimately with all kinds of artists and sensations and feelings and responses.
Absolutely. I feel like I can't recommend this book enough for creative people. If you deem yourself as a creative person in whatever aspect that may be, I think it's one of the most pertinent books to read. It's very much a companion to your own thoughts in my mind.
That's lovely. That's terrific. Yeah.
And touch on what Lydia's just said, like it's also very accessible in terms of culture, because me and Lydia have spoken before on the podcast that we're both from working class backgrounds, and I know that the class system is different in the UK to what it might be in the US, but certainly here it feels like the world of the arts and culture don't really want working class, lower class people in it. There's a lot of nepotism, there's a lot of you need to have wealth, you need to have money behind you, and I loved the way that you explored class in the book, especially with with Ella Fitzgerald and her performance and the sweat when she performs and how it's visible and how that relates to working class laborers and
Exactly. And racialization as like a fixed trait, as almost a form of caste. Yeah. So class and caste.
What are the ways that you feel that the class and culture sort of intersect in the US? So obviously it's very different from us in the UK, maybe.
The US is bigger, perhaps. Those, if you look, for example, at all the challenges to the kind of conventional literary canons, which of course you all know true, they have so much to do with the insistence in terms of class variety, in terms of gender, in terms of sexuality, in terms of race and ethnicity. Those are real pushings and insistences that this somewhat monolithic upper middle class, almost entirely white, almost entirely male, traditional canon be opened up. And with the knowledge that, you people, there are a lot of things you don't know that are worthwhile, and now we, these various groups of people, we are able to insist on that. I mean, it always has to do with accruing some real political power too, before you can use cultural power. But it's all of that is still there. It never goes away. It reconfigures itself. You have different ways of pushing against it, of opening up, art forms, but no, class prejudice will not disappear. It can get subtler, but it doesn't. And I would put, definitely.
Certainly.
Absolutely. I think I was saying to Hannah the other day, it's less of a in-your-face problem in the UK at the moment. It's more insidious, was the word I used. Because
I think in the US, it's more insidious, but also maybe more suppressed.
Yeah.
And then it, like the return of the repressed, then it pops up in all kinds of judgments, associations, etc. But often in the US, we're not calling it that.
Yeah. Just a bit of, comedy there for you guys. Don't get us started on class. Don't get us started. We're here all night.
It's easy to but I have found, for example, teaching, but also in the large world, you can be in a setting where people are more comfortable talking about, let's say, gender discrimination than race or sometimes you'll be in a group where race and ethnicity is easier than gender. Class really can be one of the naughtiest. It can really seem to be what people want least to examine, to confess. Etc. So it's very interesting.
I really don't want to confront it, do they?
No, and it's a lot. I think a lot of it's tied in with wealth as well in the UK, because class is so attributed to how much money people have or earn. And I think as a nation, we're very much tight-lipped about how much money we earn. And I think that's very much like a no-no in a situation, in a conversation.
Yeah, we've certainly seen the links between class and the arts, and especially through me and Lydia trying to become actors, and we're working class. It's there's a lot of barriers for us to overcome in order to try and get through those doors. And I think
exactly. And getting through the doors can often just mean I'm getting a chance to audition.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm getting a chance for you to have to pay attention, little again.
But I think that's what was so great about your book, is that you were bringing all these barriers that people have to overcome. You were bringing those all to the forefront and shining a light on them. And people can't kind of look away when they read your book. It's here's the ways in which there are barriers in terms of race. Here are the barriers in terms of gender. Here are the barriers in terms of class. And I think you just kind of lay it all out, and you can't look away from it. And that's it. Yeah. But in a really great way. I really enjoyed that you did that, because a lot of people would be afraid to, and it's important that we speak about these things.
It is, and it's also it's crucial to I am who I am, and this Black woman who is upper middle class, but nevertheless overlaps with all sorts of class questions or is permeated by. That's when I became a writer, without bringing that up, and which I wrote. And, writing about a wide range of things. This was my material. This informed, my judgments, my thoughts, my feelings. So whether it was overt or covert, it was what I had to work with.
Now, I am very sad that I've noticed that we've almost hit time, but I would have to pick your brain all day. But we
have many stories
yes.
about all manner of things. Yeah.
But there are so many cultural icons that you explore in the book. And I would just like to ask, was there a particular one that you enjoyed writing about the most?
Enjoy. That's very tricky. In certain ways, I enjoyed encountering the many Josephine Bakers that existed. That was probably the most fun. The Willa Cather was grueling. Because it involved so many conflicts and contradictions, etc. Ike Turner made me quite self-conscious in certain ways, but it was fun to explore naughtiness. I am who I am, and I can also have these improper. And Ella Fitzgerald was deeply, maybe the most moving to me. Baker was the most fun, but Fitzgerald was the most moving because I felt I was finding a way to discover her more fully than I had, even after listening all these years and writing somewhat about her. Yeah,
you really opened my eyes up to Ella Fitzgerald, and I'm really grateful for that. She's an incredible woman. And on Ike Turner, there is a quote that I just wanted to share. It's a very small one, but you said, "His foul radiance haunts me still."
I stole that from Robert Louis Stevenson. It's in the notes. It is from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Oh, wow.
Maybe had that source right there on the
probably
page.
You probably did, but
no, it's in the back notes. But what I adopt someone discussing him says, is he a particular special, uncanny creature, or is it the mere radiance of the foul soul? And I just when I read them years ago, and it totally came back to me when I decided I'm not done with Ike Turner here. Yeah. Oh, it's a great line. And this is why I steal from writers.
That's the beauty of it.
There's nothing wrong. As long as you steal the good stuff. You just steal the good stuff and you're fine.
That's right. Yes.
I also have to mention that one of my favourite bits was you referring to Jay-Z as a star and Beyonce as a galaxy. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was fun.
And it's so funny because they've just released the Barbie trailer this week, and everyone's been going crazy about the trailer where they've been putting the female characters where it's like, this Barbie is a da-da-da, and saying all the amazing things that she is. And then all the male characters, it just says, he's just Ken next to all of them. And you saying that about Jay-Z and Beyonce.
He's just Ken.
That is very funny. That's great.
But I am really sad that we have to wrap this interview up, because I honestly could spend hours with your brain. I think you've got the most incredible mind, and it's been so wonderful to read your book and to chat to you. So honestly, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lydia. This was great. We had lots of fun. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. And listeners, you can order yourselves a copy of Constructing a Nervous System, a memoir, which is out now and published by Granta, and I will pop a link to that in the show notes. Margo, as far as I know, you are not very active on social media. Is that correct?
Not. I may become more so, but I'm not. I go through the motions, but that's...
Well, they can find you, but you may not say anything. So
that's exactly it.
Enigmatic.
The power of the enigmatic. Thank you.
Next up in our Rathbones Folio special, we are joined by Michelle de Kretser. Michelle's book, Scary Monsters, was this year's winner of the Rathbones Folio Prize fiction category. Scary Monsters was described by the judges as a sublime novel that slips, fascinates, and terrifies at once. De Kretser's Scary Monsters deserves to be read again and again. Michelle is an Australian writer who was born in Sri Lanka and moved to Australia at the age of 14. As the author of 6 novels, Michelle is no stranger to winning and being nominated for awards for her work. Her second novel, The Hamilton Case, was winner of the Tasmania Pacific Prize, the Encore Award, and the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. Her 2007 novel, The Lost Dog, was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize for Fiction. She has also won the Miles Franklin Award twice and the Christina Stead Prize for Fiction 3 times, just to name a few. Amongst all of this, Michelle has also worked as an editor for travel guides company Lonely Planet and was a founding editor of the Australian Women's Book Review. I am so thrilled to be joined by Michelle today. So, Michelle, welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast.
No,
That's very kind of you.
Thank you for coming. Now, as this is our Rathbones Folio special, we are asking this question to all of this year's winners. How did it feel to be nominated and to win this esteemed accolade?
Oh, look, it was absolutely wonderful. I think perhaps more than usually. I mean, it's always lovely to win a prize. But I think what's really special about the Rathbones Folio Prize is that it's judged by other writers, so it's called the Writers' Prize. And the judges were really, writers I admired so much. I mean, someone like Alice Smith, I have been reading for years. And so, it was a meaningful honor, which is so important, so important. So it was extra special, really. And then, of course, it's also an international award, so that's always nice. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Especially with Ali Smith judging. There was a great lineup of judges this year. I am particularly a fan of Jackie Kay.
Jackie, wonderful, and Guy Gunaratne as well.
Yes,
so three the judges. How lucky, lucky.
And your book, Scary Monsters, it's got such a unique format, and we will get into that, but it's had similar comparisons to How to Be Both by Ali Smith, because that also has quite a unique format in that she plays with form, and her book, I think it had 2 different printings, and one of the printings there was like the historical section at the start, and then the other one was something different. I mean, I've not read it myself, but I have seen in a number of interviews that it's been compared to that, so that must have been really exciting to have her judging as well.
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah, I mean, I also read and admired Jackie and Guy, but it was particularly wonderful to win this prize with Ali as a judge because of that book. I mean, all of Alice Smith's books give a writer a sense of possibility, which is a wonderful gift, I think. You read one of her books and you think anything is possible. It kind of gives you permission as a writer to do anything. And the important lesson I took away from How to Be Both was the extra layer of meaning you get when the form of the book embodies the themes of the books, the meaning of the book. So as you said, with How to Be Both, that having that double printing, it was really with, historical narrative and a contemporary one, and then just the randomness of which printing you happen to pick up in a bookshop was really reflective of some of the ideas that were being explored in the novel. Ideas about chance, ideas about the metaphysics of time, for instance, and the layering of experience. So with my book, because it recounted 2 migrant narratives, I wanted a book, a form that embodied the experience of migration in as much as one can do that, in an object like a book. And so whichever narrative, the book has not got a back cover, it's got 2 front covers. So which you can read, you can start at either end. You get to the end of one narrative, you have to turn the book upside down if you want to go on and read the other narrative. And the reason for that was the idea that migration upends lives, turns lives upside down. And the 2 halves of the novel are very disconnected. The story changes radically. One half is set in the south of France in the 1980s, the other half in Melbourne in the near future. And so again, the reason for that was that the reader needs to make sense of the story, which is what migrants have to do when we change countries, especially if we change cultures radically. So, you find yourself asking questions like, how do I understand this?
how is this coherent? How do I make sense of this? So I hope that the reader would experience on a micro level some of that sense of disorientation and questioning that migrants experience when they change countries. So that was one of the reasons, an important reason behind the form of the novel, that upside down format. The other reason was that, as you mentioned, this is my sixth novel, and progressively in my last couple of novels at least, I've been thinking about what makes a novel, and wanting to play with this idea. Because all art is serious play, really, isn't it? And I have been wondering how much connective tissue can you take out of a novel and still have a novel? So my last novel was five separate narratives, but there was a character who appeared in each one, sometimes only fleetingly, sometimes the central character, but she did appear in each one. So with this one, I wanted to go that step further and take out, more connections. So that I hope the reader would ask themselves, what makes a novel a novel? Can we have great disparities of plot and character and time and place, and still, is this still a novel? So, I thought of it as a novel. It was conceived as a whole, but I thought it was useful to put those questions out there, because when I read a novel, normally it just slips down. I don't really think about what I am reading formally in terms of genre. And I hope that this book would lead readers to ask the question, well, what is a novel? What makes a novel? There are various thematic resonances between the two parts. And readers kept finding things that I hadn't even realized were in there. They'd say, oh, but there is this in one part, and then it appears in this form in the other part. And I hadn't even realized I'd put those things in together. But I think it's wonderful that human beings are, absolutely, we are pattern-seeking, pattern-making animals. And so readers were looking for connections and finding connections that I hadn't even seen were there. So that was, that's all been very, very lovely and exciting for me.
I can imagine it is such a fascinating book, and I was so excited to get to it, because I don't think I've ever, like I said, I've not read How to Be Both by Ellie Smith, but I don't think I've ever come across a book like this before. And I wanted to ask, why did you feel like it was the right moment to write a book like this? I know it's a big question, but
I don't know. I simply just, you mean in terms of the format, why was it the right moment, or the content?
Both. Yeah, the content and the format.
I guess I, having being a migrant myself,
Mm-hmm.
I was keen to write a novel about migrant experience that used first person, because I hadn't done that before. I had written about migrant experiences, but not in the first person. And I thought that would be an interesting sort of technical thing to do, just because, from one novel to the next, you don't want to repeat yourself. Also, there is, this is sort of ongoing, but there is so much demonization of migrants, and particularly migrants of color, in the West. And, even if not demonization, then ambivalence about, our usefulness, our desirability, I suppose, as citizens of our new homelands. And of course, Australia famously has very cruel border policies concerning asylum seekers. So all of that in the air, and wanting to write about that, really, all those things.
Now, you've said that your novel explores, the migrant experience, and it centres migrant voices, and I felt like it was explored in a really powerful way, but at times very funny. Now, you migrated yourself from Sri Lanka to Australia at the age of 14, was it?
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask how much of your own experiences fed into these characters of Lyle and Lily.
Oh gosh, it's a good question, but hard to answer. So Lily is the young woman who is teaching in the south of France in the 1980s, and I did teach in the south of France in the 1980s. So I suppose everything about the setting and what it meant to teach English in a French high school at that time, and what French society was like at that time, fed was directly, direct memory. But everything that happens to Lily is made up. And Lily is, I guess she is I think she's a smarter and more politicized and more interesting character than I was at that age. So, there is overlap and there is no overlap. Similarly with Lyle, I guess there was what Lyle has, that he's this middle-aged man trying to keep his head down and pass under the radar in near future Melbourne, where, if immigrants do the wrong thing, they can be deported, for instance. So, I mean, the wrong thing in terms of, what the very right-wing government ordains as the wrong thing. And I suppose I had that sense, especially in Australia in the, really for most of the 20th century, I would say, of there being not many immigrants of colour. It's a very different situation in Britain. And so really you didn't want to stand out too much. You hoped to pass unnoticed, because the kind of attention it could attract would quite often be the wrong kind of attention.
Now, I personally felt more connected to Lily's character. Now, this could possibly be because she's a young woman and I don't have any personal experience of being a migrant, but her sort of, I don't know how to describe it. She's doesn't really, she's having this moment in her life where she kind of doesn't know what to do with herself, and I feel like every young woman has had that. I especially felt that when I graduated from university. I graduated with a drama and theatre degree, and after that I was kind of like, I don't know which direction to go in, and I feel like she's experiencing that at the same time as being a migrant, so it just adds a whole other layer to sort of moving into that adult part of your life, and it just makes it that much more complicated, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. Because, I did want in the Lily part of the story to capture something. I should say that I think the Lily half is much more realist than the Lyle half, which is dystopian and sort of quite satiric and much more impressionistic in a kind of German expressionist, I should say, German expressionist way of characters and situations being pushed to near caricature in order to capture something of the sense of the times in which he is living, which are horrible and unbelievable, really incredible. So to capture some of that, just as the German expressionists were trying to show the horror of, Germany in the 20s and 30s. Whereas Lily is much more realistic. And I did want to capture something of that sense of uncertainty of being a young woman at that difficult stage when, study has finished and which has provided all this scaffolding, this certainty. And now you have to work out what you're going to do with your life and how you're going to be. And also how important friendships are at that time. Well, at any time, really. But, the intensity of friendships at that time, which I think are quite beautiful, really. And so, Lily's friends with a young English woman called Minna. And they just have joyful times together. I wanted to capture something of the intensity and the joyfulness and the wonderful silliness of being young, that freedom to just sort of play, really. Whereas Lyle is weighed down by all kinds of responsibilities and fears.
Yeah, and Lyle's part of the book reminded me of the book The Good Immigrant by Nikesh Shukla. I don't know if you've come across it before.
No, I haven't.
It's great. It's a collection of essays by various actors, writers, creatives that have experience of being an immigrant. And I think there's I read the UK version, but there's also a US version as well. And these essays, they just really look into how disorienting it is being an immigrant and how you feel like you have to present yourself as the good immigrant and you always feel like you're trying to prove yourself. And I definitely got a sense of that with Lyle in the book. I mean, him and his wife, they literally anglicize their names, don't they? And his job role as well, it's it's just really unsettling. That's the only way I can think to describe it.
Yes.
Whereas with Lily, I mean, she describes her experience as there's a moment in the book where she's talking about loneliness and kind of feeling like, I think she describes it as the timeless now, like living in the timeless now, and she doesn't know what to do with herself, and she's really feeling this loneliness. So I think definitely for her, like her friendships, the intensity of her friendships offer up like an escape from that loneliness of this experience, which I thought was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I mean, it's astonishing, isn't it? I think of it now of, you're young and you go off to live on the other side of the world. And this is in a time before, of course, anything like, the internet, email even. So you have letters, you have to rely on letters, and international phone calls are incredibly expensive. So you just really can't, they are for emergencies, basically. So I remember often being on the other side of the world and thinking, no one knows where I am. No one, knows what is happening to me. And I wanted to give Lily that sense of, of loneliness, really, of isolation, I should say. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you also for mentioning that collection of essays. I'll look out for that. I think the thing with Lyle is that, he's so desperate to be what he thinks of as a good Australian in order to stay safe. And what he and his wife have done is absolutely take on these really awful values that are not spoken about in Australia, but that absolutely exist, but that we don't like admitting to, I suppose. We like admitting to, nice, good qualities like mateship, for instance. It's a big Australian thing, mateship, you help your mates. But, we are encouraged under capitalism to be increasingly ruthless in our individualism. And that is, it's sort of every person for themselves. And so that, that is actually what Lyle sees of as sort of unspoken values are what actually, run society, not this other kind of, nice discourse of, friendship or egalitarianism. Wealth is everything. Consumption is everything. Property is everything. You have to accumulate as much property as possible at whatever cost. So I think Lyle and his wife Chanel really suss out the unspoken determinants of contemporary Australia, the hidden unpleasant side of life under neoliberalism.
Yeah, it creates quite a very jarring sense of identity that they're experiencing because they're trying to slip into these values and they're losing their authentic self, essentially, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. Well, they're not encouraged to look back. They're encouraged to remake themselves, in Australia and to be the good migrants.
Now, as we've said, Lily's part of the novel is set in the 80s and Lyle's is sort of a dystopia near future that it feels very frighteningly close and relevant. And there is, I wanted to know, was there a particular moment in time or a particular issue in time that you wanted to capture with these two time periods?
Well, one thing I was thinking of was that so Lily's story, I'm not giving anything away really, ends in May 1981 when her time in France comes to an end. And what happened in May 1981 in France was the election of François Mitterrand's socialist government. This was the first left-wing government to be elected since before the war in France. So it was an extraordinary moment. It was over 40 years it had taken. Conservative governments had been in power all the way through. And Thatcher had been recently elected in Britain, Reagan in the US. So fairly grim outlook with both those people, those leaders. And then along came France and elects, it seems to, what's the trend? Elects, a left-wing socialist government. And there was such rejoicing in the streets. I remember that so vividly. And I suppose I wanted to, and then, in Lyle's part of the story, it's we're back to very frightening times under a very right-wing government, and I wanted to remind people that there is the power of the ballot box, because in Australia we are obviously we do have free elections, and that things can change for the better. We can choose to live differently. We don't have to end up with the future that Lyle has ended up with. One of the big things, of course, is that, the sort of natural world is in a catastrophic state in Lyle's section of the book. And, it is possible to vote for governments that will have a more responsible attitude to all of those things. So I guess that was the point I wanted to make with those two different times.
Can we just borrow you in the UK so that you can speak to everybody?
I hope change is coming there.
I really hope that we can escape this Conservative government because they don't care about the arts and it's very distressing.
And fun. No, rich.
Exactly, yeah. And me and Lydia have spoken before on the podcast about how we're working class. So we've certainly seen over the years how horrendous this government has been to anybody. I can't even get into it because I'll get wrapped up. But like you said, it's important. The ballot box is important. People need to be electing the right people.
Absolutely. I mean, Australians voted in a Labour government last year. And we've actually now got, because Australia has a state and federal system, we've actually got Labour governments throughout mainland Australia. Only the Tasmania is holding out with a Conservative government. Look, the Labour Party has a long way to go. I think it's basically a centrist party. It certainly continues to protect its rich donors, and I think they could be doing a lot more about climate change than they are. However, they are definitely an improvement on what came before. That's not a very high bar to clear, but we are grateful for it. Believe me.
Yeah,
we really are. We really, really are. So, things have to go. Hope is necessary. Hope is necessary. The hope that it is possible. The hope of a better life. People can't live without that hope. That's what ends people, really.
Yeah,
you have to believe in the possibility of change for the better.
Now, lastly, I wanted to ask you very quickly, I've managed to slip this in. Lily aspires to be like Simone de Beauvoir. Why her in particular? Are you a fan?
Oh, yes, I am. And because I guess back in the 1981, one of the books, two books had a huge impact on young women. One was, many, there was also Germaine Greer, for instance, female eunuch. But because Lily has come out of French studies, she's very influenced by two books that were very widely read at the time. And one was The Second Sex, de Beauvoir's book about the history of women, basically. And the other was her autobiography, and particularly the first volume, Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter. Those books were devoured by women of my generation. They really were. And so de Beauvoir at that time was an absolutely sort of heroic figure. I don't know who would be comparable. Maybe Judith Butler for young women today, or Greta Thunberg for the climate movement. She really was this, someone who was greatly admired and revered, really, for the unconventionality of her life as much as for her books, because she in the 1920s, she and Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre, her lifelong sort of partner, although they both had, numerous other, lovers, they made a pact that they decided not to get married, but just, to live together, which was, really quite something for the times. And this marriage that wasn't a marriage, that was this pact that accommodated other people, it was really something quite special, very unconventional, very much flying in the face of French bourgeois respectability. They both came from very middle-class families, and they both rejected the roles set out for them. And of course, for de Beauvoir, even more courage needed, because for a woman to reject that role was really, men were allowed to do what they wanted as long as they didn't, make too much public display of it. But for a woman to do that stuff was absolutely shocking, really. And of course, she was so smart, you know, she was incredibly brilliant. So this woman who, you know, just seemed to embody, you know, intelligence and unconventionality and sexiness and all of it, really.
Listeners, if you are also looking for a writer that embodies intelligence, I would highly recommend picking up a copy of Scary Monsters. I will be including a link to that in the show notes. Now, I try not to recommend people buying from Amazon, but I had a look yesterday and there are only 9 copies at the moment of your book available at the moment on Amazon because they're clearly flying off the shelves. So get your copies.
Right.
And am I right, Michelle, in thinking that you are not on social media?
No, not really.
No. Okay. Normally we ask our listeners.
Well, I was on Instagram and then I got locked out of my account because I didn't give them my birthday or something. I don't know. I was about to go away on holiday and they were asking for my birthday and I thought, no, this is surveillance. I'm not doing this. I should have given them a false date, of course. How stupid was that? And then I found I was locked out. So there you go. So therefore I thought, well, it's okay. I can do that.
Well, our listeners can find you through your work. They've got lots of your books to explore if they enjoy Scary Monsters, which I don't see how anybody wouldn't. It's a brilliant book. It's so powerful and so funny and just, it's just such an excellent portrayal of the migrant experience and it's a really important read. So I highly recommend it to all of our listeners. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today. And
oh, no. It's so much, Hannah, for having me on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Finally, to round off our Rathbones Folio special, we have the incredibly talented Victoria Adukwei Bulley, who is the winner of the 2023 Rathbones Folio Prize in the poetry category for her groundbreaking collection, Quiet. On Quiet, the judges said, impresses with its strength and power, its ingenious investigation of inner life, the tensions and surprises within. The book's quiet balance shook us to the core. Victoria is a poet, writer, artist and filmmaker of Ghanaian heritage. An alumna of the Barbican Young Poets, she's a recipient of an Eric Gregory Award and has held residencies in the US, Brazil and the V&A Museum in London. In 2017, her debut pamphlet, Girl B, was published by the African Poetry Book Fund. She is the recipient of a Techne Scholarship for doctoral research in creative writing at Royal Holloway, University of London. Quiet is her debut full-length collection, and we are so pleased to have Victoria on the podcast today, the first poet we've had on. So, Victoria, welcome to our Bookends.
Thank you so much. I'm really honoured to be the first poet. That's
your collection was honestly amazing, and I listened to a podcast that you did earlier. I think it was the Book Rising podcast, and you were talking about how it's not often that you meet people that are very into poetry. And I think you were talking about you'd got into a taxi and the driver was like the first driver that you'd spoken to that actually was interested in poetry. And I don't have Lydia, my co-host, with me today, but she is a poetry fan and I am just totally new to this world. So this was an absolute joy to read. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you. No, it really is true. I don't take it for granted at all when I meet someone who is a fan of poetry. I think it can feel like, especially in this country, it can feel like poetry is a very niche thing that is kind of limited to a few canonical, very well-known sort of names like Wordsworth or Shakespeare and just sonnets and things like that. But yeah, it's amazing when you go out and you do actually meet more people who love it. Yeah, I never take it for granted.
We have been starting our conversations with the winners of the Rathbones Folio Prize by we've been asking everyone the same question, which is, what was your experience like winning this esteemed accolade?
I think the best thing about it was the judging panel. I think from the minute that they announced the shortlist, there was a shortlist announcement event that a couple of us authors were at, and, meeting Jackie Kay, meeting Ali Smith, meeting Guy Gunaratne. They were all just such avid fans, I felt, of the books. And so that really set everything off on a really wonderful path, because when you feel that the judges are really on your side, regardless of whether or not you think you're going to win. That's just an incredible feeling. Like it just seemed that they knew the book really well, each of them individually. And so I guess to win it just doubles down on that sense that it's possible to write a book that you write very much for your own sense of well-being, and it goes out into the world and is read by authors who you really admire, and they read it with such intimacy. So to win just doubles down on that sense of wonder and gratitude.
Absolutely. And all three of them are powerhouse writers. I love Jackie Kay. I went to an event that she did with Douglas Stewart in Manchester, I think it was last year, and just like being in her presence, like, she's just amazing. So yeah, huge congratulations to you, because this is just amazing. And for your debut as well, like, this is huge.
Thank you.
So before we get into Quiet, I would love to give our listeners a taste of Quiet. So would you mind reading something from the collection?
Sure. Yeah, I often just read the first poem from the book, because I think the way I structured the book was thinking in terms of almost like the architecture of a house. And so there are like doors and different rooms, and then there's a garden at the end. But I also kind of wanted to be a bit tongue in cheek, and to, knowing that the book is called Quiet, I wanted to sort of open in a way that's actually not quiet, but contain the word. So the first poem is called Declaration. Declaration. If sickness begins in the gut, if I live in the belly of the beast, if here at the heart of empire, if careful in the house of the host, if quiet at the hearth of the host, if here at the home of empire, if I live in the belly of the beast, let me beget sickness in its gut. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I was so in awe of your writing and your style. It's just different to anything I've read before. I mean, obviously, like I said, I don't normally gravitate towards poetry, and I think now, like, you've totally changed me, and I feel like I'm like ready for the world of poetry now. Before I get into style, I need to ask about the inspiration for Quiet and how it began. What were the first ideas that you had for Quiet? How it sort of became a collection. Did you know that you were starting as a collection, or was it one poem that then became, how did it form?
Yeah, it's interesting really, because I think it formed over many years, but then there are a few things that kind of set it into motion in a nice way. So I am sort of like at the tail end right now of completing a PhD in creative writing at Royal Holloway. And when I began that, because basically to do this PhD, you are writing a book of poetry, but you're also writing a thesis, and they're kind of meant to be in conversation. And when I began it, I was thinking about language and how it fragments and splinters, and how ultimately it kind of fails a lot of the time. And there are things that you can attempt to say, but it's only ever approximate. And somewhere along the line, I was introduced to a fantastic thinker and artist, Lene Denise, who is also a DJ, and she's a DJ scholar. And I remember talking to her at an event at the ICA in London, and she mentioned this book to me called The Sovereignty of Quiet by another scholar called Kevin Quashie, who's based in the US. And when I read this book, I thought, gosh, like, this is it. This isn't just it in terms of what I've been trying to articulate about language and the things that can't really be said and don't even need to be said, but also just thinking about quiet as a way of being, and a way that, and as Black writers and Black readers, like, there's a level of life that doesn't get seen to because it's so below the register that we're used to hearing. So that book for me is such a big deal, and it's why, at the beginning of the book, there's a quote from Kevin Quashie, and again in the acknowledgements, I'm saying to Kevin, who I'm yet to meet, but we have been in touch, I'm saying to him, this book is also for you. So that really solidified the idea, and I really felt like not only is it key to the ethos of the ideas ideas that are going on in the book, but also the kind of way of moving through the world that I've been quite familiar with feels encompassed in the title Quiet, and the kind of work that Kevin has been doing around thinking in that way.
It's so interesting, and it's so exciting to be able to talk to you, because I feel like I've just been like curled up for the last few nights with your book and that sounds so creepy. But I really feel like I've been like absorbed in this world that you've created, and it's just totally, I feel like transformed, because like I said, like I don't read poetry, so to have been so absorbed by this, it's just been amazing. And I wanted to speak actually about Kevin Quashie amongst the other writers. You preface each section with an epigraph, and you have words from Kevin Quashie and Toni Morrison and Zora Neale Hurston. What was it about these quotes that resonated with you in particular for this collection?
Yeah, like I really wanted to, like I really believe that even if you have this incredible novel idea or poetry book idea, you're not the only person to have thought these thoughts. And I think often there can be a sense of not wanting to seem like one's work has derived from another person's work, but I just don't really relate to that. I really feel that my experience as a reader and as a writer is so rooted in even just the smallest things I've read, like the smallest sentences, the smallest sort of utterances or quotations that have just stayed with me for a long time. And these just happen to be some of them. And I wanted to include them because I feel that even if there's something I haven't said explicitly in the poetry book, in my own words, Toni Morrison has already said, "Girl, I got my mind and what goes on in it," which is to say, I got me, which is from her book Sula. Or, you know, Zora Neale Hurston has already said, you know, there's a basin in the mind where words float around on thought and thought on sound and sight, like this sort of like really numinous and like fluid space that exists within the self. Or there's Imani Perry at the back who says, you never tell all the secrets when you're trying to get free. And so for me, the inclusion of those quotations at the beginning of each section, they say something about the section, but they also say something about the themes of the book. They also, you know, that all of them pretty much, but for Kevin Quashie, they're all Black women. They are all also African Americans. That's the one thing I'm like, if I were to do this book again, there may be some inclusions that I would swap just to kind of not put it so heavy on the sort of other side of the Atlantic. But yeah, they're kind of like signposts, but also just thank yous as well. Thank yous for saying these things and making it apparent to me that I'm not thinking alone. I'm thinking within a lineage.
Yeah, I always find it so interesting to hear writers talk about the other writers that have inspired them. And I think, like you said, you know, there are people that have had your thoughts before. And I think I was particularly struck by the quote you used, which was spoken by Evidence Joel, is it? In an interview on Sky News that was on the disappearance of her son. And I didn't realise that's what that quote was from when I first read it. And then when I got to the end and read your notes on that poem, I went back and reread it, and it just sort of gave a whole other layer to that poem, and it made it all the more powerful. And it was an even more powerful read experience, because that, I am really sorry if you don't like people dog-earing pages, but I love that. I have dog-eared several.
Wow.
And How Not to Disappear was one of the ones that I dog-eared because it just really struck me. And I interpreted How Not to Disappear at first. I was reading it from the perspective of a woman, and you know, the feelings that I've had walking home at night, and, you know, the fear that instills the woman and the things that happen to women. But then actually going back and reading it and reading it with that quote from Evidence Joel, it added a whole other layer to actually the dangers of like navigating the world as a Black person. And there's just so many different ways that poem could be interpreted. And I think that's the same thing goes for a lot of your collection. There are many ways that these things can be interpreted. But what did you want to capture with How Not not to disappear? Because obviously there's a way I've interpreted it, but what were the feelings that you wanted to capture?
I mean, I think you've already kind of covered it, but just a real sense of, because I think it was, I can't quite remember, but I think when this happened, when I wrote the poem, actually, that's the better way to think about it. So when I wrote the poem, it was in the wake of everything that had happened with Sarah Everard, and how big that was. And I don't know, I think I often think about even just being a kid, and when, for example, Madeleine McCann went missing.
Yeah.
And I was really young when that happened. And this sounds really stupid, but there was a moment when I realized that other people are missing. Other people are missing. Like, there was a moment when I realized she was not the only child to go missing ever.
Yeah.
I just couldn't believe that. Like, I just couldn't believe, like, because, walking around London, for example, every now and then you'll see like a poster about someone who's missing. Missing people, and call this number. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like, there's so many missing people. And so there's a kind of hierarchy to who gets to be sort of publicized as being missing. In including that quote as this sort of preface to the poem, that quote really highlights to me that sense of not just the grief of the mother, but the sense of, okay, yeah, there are other people who go missing, but also even in the call for help, the response to that call is so devastating. That sense, like, how could you possibly say that to someone?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. The sense in the poem is that, there are so many people who've gone missing, and so many of those who are missing and are Black, for example, whether they're male or female, they don't receive the kind of care or concern. And even if there are sort of mysterious circumstances, there's a sense in which, oh, it's not suspicious. And sometimes I think, God forbid I ever went missing, I'm sure someone could pick up a scrap of a poem somewhere and think, oh, it's not suspicious. She was having a hard time. You know what I mean? And I just think that's really, and nobody I know would have any power over that. Who loves me would be able to say, no, that's not true. And have something done about it. So I found that quite terrifying. And so the concept of how not to disappear kind of came from that.
That's so powerful, the way that you've put that. And it is frightening. And that poem in particular, I've folded down so many pages. I think that might have been, I don't want to say which is my favorite now, because now I'm flicking through and going, no, this one was. But that was the one that, like, I think moved me the most. Now, I touched on it earlier, but obviously I really loved the way that you experiment with style and with form. And I think, there are experimental poems in here, and there are prose style poems. Some of them feel quite lyrical and like they're to a beat. Some of them feel like quite stream of consciousness. But mostly, like, it feels like your work doesn't really have, like, you don't give yourself any restrictions. There doesn't seem to be any rules or kind of limits. What inspires your style, and how did you find it?
I think a big part of what inspires me to write in a kind of, without a kind of, I'm looking for the right word, but sort of strictness or a sense of, I must stick with this way of writing or this arrangement of words. I think what inspires that is very much about sound and image, and I don't have a problem with anybody who writes just in sonnets or just some of my favorite poets. You turn the page, the poem looks the same, like a block of text, a block of text, a block of text. And I have no issue with that whatsoever. It's just that I think in this book, I was trying to capture so many of the different ways that my brain works. And sometimes my brain just works in more visual ways than just a block of text. And sometimes it works in ways where I'm thinking about, how can I put this on the page the way it sounds in my head? So sometimes for me, the positioning of a word on the page really is about taking a breath and then saying the word rather than just, leading from one line onto the next. And I guess at other times, I really want the book to be a visual object that someone can pick up and think, what does the image say? Like, how does it feel to look at it? So yeah, that would be my answer, I think.
I think it's one of, I'm trying to find which one it is. Oh, there we go. Lost Belonging, the way you've structured that, it's like I don't know how to describe it without saying it looks like a hill. Like, like something going uphill. That's how the words are kind of structured. And then I think my favourite in terms of style was noise, but there's the brackets. I don't know what the brackets stand for. Do you call the title noise?
So that poem, where is it? So that's an interesting one because that's probably the most experimental one in the book. Only because when I read it, I say white noise, but I'm trying to sort of use the brackets to kind of use the whiteness of the page. And so to kind of, it's experimental in the sense that I don't know, I know that it might not be read the same way by everyone. So that to me is part of it. But yeah, I was interested in redaction, like leaving words out. I was interested in what it would look like with all of these gaps that are sort of like holes in the page. And also, again, like the whiteness of the page, and then making a commentary about sort of like the ubiquitousness of this page that is white, that, you know, the very thing that I'm writing on feels like it is a white Western institution. That, you know, this book, you know, the concept of it, the way that it's arranged, and it's like I was trying to bring that into the poem.
Yeah, totally. I also thought Black Noise was great as well. I really enjoy that as a visual. Me and Lydia mention this far too often on the podcast, but we are both actors. So I really enjoyed, like, this is probably going to make me sound horrendous, but I really enjoyed like reading your words out loud, and not just kind of sat reading them in my head. I was like wanting to perform them. Like, I just think there's so much in here that you could get lost with and play with, and I just love that. How do you feel kind of having to do readings of your poems? Do you enjoy it, or, you know, what's that like?
I mean, it means a lot to me that, you know, yourself and Lydia are both actors, because I really for the longest time wanted to be an actress. For the longest time, you know, I would still do it if, you know, if someone said, "Oh, do you want to be in this thing?" and I liked the idea, I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it." But to get to the point, there is a way in which these poems are vocal, like they are about sound of the language, they are about emotion, they are about a kind of landscape that is not two-dimensional. It's a three-dimensional thing. And so when I read them, I really try to take my time. I really try to not read them the same way I read them last time, because that's how it is, you know, all the time. I really enjoy doing readings because for me, it's not, I wouldn't say it's performance, but it kind of isn't far from what I studied for so long, thinking about presence, what people mean when you talk about presence. And what I understand it to mean is just a certain kind of aliveness that is different today than it was yesterday. So bringing my day with me has done more for my readings than saying, "Oh, I'm switching this on now." I'm not walking onto stage and switching something on, but I'm more I'm probably looking at the poem as an actor might, and thinking, how does this feel right now? Not what does it mean, but how does it feel right now? And sort of bringing that.
I love that. It means that your work is always evolving and growing with you. And I think there's something really beautiful in that. Oh my goodness, your mind. I've just noticed the time, and I am really sad because I have loved talking to you and getting more of your words and thoughts. You are, I mean, you can tell from reading this incredible collection, you know, how talented you are, how amazing your brain is. If I could just borrow it, that'd be great. But I would love to know, before I let you go, I'm used to doing this with Lydia. What is next for you?
I'm trying to finish a novel right now, and you know, I'm kind of like halfway there, and it's just one of those things that I just really need to do. Like, I said to my agent Emma that, you know, I'm doing this for me. Like, I have to finish it, because if I don't finish it, I'm just never it will just live inside of me and it won't feel good. So right now the challenge is to finish a novel. Also finish the PhD, because I still have to do the sort of like theory side, the poetry side. And yeah, I'm just trying to sort of enjoy all of this. It's like so nice having a book out there. Like, I just can't believe people are reading it. I just can't.
Oh, I can fully believe that people are reading this. It's so good. And yeah, just casually doing a PhD, writing a novel, winning awards for this. Like, I'm just really, really glad that your talent is being recognised and that I've had the opportunity to read your work and had the opportunity to chat to you. And I am very excited to hear that you've got a novel coming out. We must have you back on the podcast once your novel is out there in the world, because I have a feeling I'll have many more questions for you.
Honor, thank you. No, this has been really lovely. I really appreciate it.
Oh no, thank you so much. Is there anywhere that our listeners can find you on social media?
Yes, I'm not super active, but I am on Instagram. So it's just my name, Victoria Adukwei Bulley. I'm on Twitter. I'm also mostly retweeting, but yeah, Twitter, Instagram, yeah.
Amazing. I will link that in the show notes, and I will also, listeners, be linking a bookshop link for Victoria's collection Quiet, which is published by Faber and out now. And I would highly recommend that you pick up a copy. Victoria, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Bookends, to listening to our 2023 Rathbones Folio Prize special episode. It was an absolute honour to chat to all three of this year's winners, and we honestly cannot recommend their books enough. If you have enjoyed these conversations and would like to purchase their books, we have popped links in the show notes for all three books. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe, as it helps to boost us in the charts. You can follow us at Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram or at Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And until next time, happy reading and thanks for listening. Bye!